Everyone, and welcome back to this week's video. And this week's in this Kids Skype study group videos, we'll carry on by looking at the faithful characters recorded in the Bible. Like we said in previous videos, that we'll be carrying on to look not in the Hebrews chapter anymore, for the characters get much more intricate, I should say, in best words. But we're going to now look more at more other characters recorded in the Bible, like we have done for the past few weeks. We did Esther and Elijah, and today is the same thing with the character of Nehemiah. So, thanking the Lord through our Saviour Jesus Christ, let us begin with the character of Nehemiah. So first, let's look at the biological and the overall description of Nehemiah before we go into the faithful story of his. So, who was Nehemiah? Nehemiah was the son of Hakaliah of the tribe of Judah. Nehemiah was a Hebrew living in Persia, we see, where he served the king, we see. Nehemiah occupied in this situation when he was serving the king a confidential position with Artaxerxes, the Persian king. So we see the comparison, we can see the position that Nehemiah held with the Persian king was similar to the position that Mordecai had held under the king Ahasuerus as well. As well as this, his position as itself is known as the king's cupbearer. We see. So we're going to now see in a verse about Nehemiah's actions. So we're going to see in his own words recorded in Nehemiah, first chapter, the 2nd to 4th verse. We're going to see about Nehemiah's prayer, we see. So let us read about this. As it says, Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble, he says. Trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept, we see. For some days I mourned and fasted. So the answer to Nehemiah's prayer came suddenly, though, to the actions that he had asked for, because it was, as we see, the actions that he took, that it is said he had mourned and fasted for many days for the sorrow that he had heard, that his people have been put in a position where they have no protection. So the one who referred to in his prayer as the man we see, as was actually the king of Persia to sort out the situation itself. Nehemiah refers to in his prayer as the man, the king of Persia, we see, towards God. He had prepared a banquet, we see. So Nehemiah is preparing a banquet, we see, for his nobles, at which the queen also was present. We see, we can imagine that the guests were all attired in their best garments as well, because it is something which has been derived by someone who was served the king himself. We see, so everyone was joyful to be in the king's presence. Nehemiah, though, as we see, as usual, was at the king's right hand. So that he might taste of the food and wine before it was served to the king, of course. So that was the position Nehemiah was in, and a trustworthy position he was given to taste it, to make sure the king's life is not in jeopardy, we see. So as he served the wine, the king notices the contrast between Nehemiah and the happy guests. He saw a sadness he had never seen before in Nehemiah, he see. So Artaxerxes, the king, placed his hand on Nehemiah's arm and inquired and said, why is thy countenance sad? So we can read the verse actually to make it much more easier for us. We can see in Nehemiah 2nd chapter 2nd verse itself, it says, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, he says. Nehemiah then realized, so we see in this situation, he feared. So Nehemiah is saying essentially he was very sad in the situation. As the king is seeing in the situation, there's a very clear sense that there's a contrast, like I said. So Nehemiah wrote that he feared perhaps lest his sadness of heart by misconstrued by the king, he says. Nehemiah then realized the king's inquiry might be God doing itself once the king had acquired this itself, providing just the opportunity he sought. He said to the king, you see, in Nehemiah the first 6 verses from the 2nd chapter to 6th verse, so I'll read that again. So Nehemiah had realized that this was the position where he could ask the king for an opportunity to help his people from the position of where they're in a vulnerable position to be attacked and be stolen from. So he's going to ask the king now in this position, in the 2nd to 6th verse of Nehemiah, about how to solve this problem. So let us read this now. So in Nehemiah's 2nd chapter, 2nd to 6th verse, it says, "So the king asked me, 'Why does your face look sad?' Said, 'When you are not ill, this cannot be nothing but sadness of heart.' I was very much afraid." So we read this before, but then when we continue, it says, "But I said to the king, 'May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city of where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" He says, "The king said to me, 'What is it you want?' Then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king, 'If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it.' Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, 'How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?' It pleased the king to send me, so I set time," we see in this situation. So in this situation, we see he said to the king, it was not indeed a short time for the period that he had set, because we see in Nehemiah 5th chapter 4th verse that it records that he asked for a 12-year leave in this situation, for the absence in this situation from the duties of help supporting the king to help his ancestors' country. So we see the audacity in this situation. We could think for Nehemiah to ask for a 12-year of absence from the king's presence. We see it takes great courage for Nehemiah to make this request, because the king could have easily have considered the rebuilding of the walls and the gates of Jerusalem an act of rebellion against his rule, we see. But we see a desire by Nehemiah to set up the nation of Israel as a separate and rival government with himself as king is what he decided to do, we see. When Nehemiah asked for what he did, he laid his life on the line, because the king could have easily objected it or could have been infuriated by his command and could have beheaded him. But we see God answered his prayer, and he had supported Nehemiah in that situation and graced him in the position to be separate as a separate nation of Israel and the king himself, we see. So Nehemiah had the faith that his prayer would be answered, where God answered the prayer where he said, "Grant mercy in the sight of this man." Of course, as we said before, this man refers to the king of Persia. We see Nehemiah, like I said, had very high faith and that his prayer would be answered, although he did not know just how or when. He showed that faith, and he had planned in advance what he would do for the success of his undertaking if the opportunity was provided by God. So he asked for the raw materials and the provisions as well for his travels to build this wall, to not cause hindrance to the kings over time, but rather prepare everything at the start of his 12-year journey. Although Nehemiah was very young, we see a young man, we see in this situation how much he loves his people and asks for the courageous request, I should say, by his faith towards the king, because he was faithful to God and wanted to help his people. So it's a beautiful characteristics what we must learn as well. So thank you for this week's video, and I'll see you in next week's video. Bye.